All right, thank you all for being here. We are going to get started. My name is Helen Schroeder. I'm the marketing coordinator at Sigma Assessment Systems, and I will be co-facilitating or moderating your webinar for today. And along with us, we have Glenn Harrison, who will be presenting. For those of you who are new to Sigma, we're a professional services firm that offers talent development, succession planning, and psychological assessments for organizations who are looking to build their internal talent pools. We've been in business for over 50 years, so as a company, we have a lot of experience, and we're thrilled to be with you here today and give you some tips and tricks and tools for how to get buy-in for succession planning. We have about 60 minutes together, so for the first 45 minutes or so, Glenn will walk you through our webinar content. As we go, feel free to post any questions that you have in the Q&A box. I will be monitoring that. If there's something relevant to the section that we're in, we can pause and answer those questions. But we will also collect questions and spend some time going through Q&A at the end of the webinar. So you're also welcome to continue posting them later. If there's something that we don't get to in our session today, you're welcome to follow up with us via email. But for now, don't be shy, use the Q&A box. That's what it's there for. And I'll also just let you know that we are recording the session today and everyone will receive a copy of the recording as well as the webinar slides. So no need to take notes. And now, without further ado, let me introduce you to my colleague, Glenn.
Thanks, Helen.
Glenn,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to introduce you.
I will be quiet for a few minutes. So.
All right, let me hype you up for a minute. Glenn is an organizational transformation consultant and a succession planning expert. Over the course of his career, he's worked with a third of the Fortune 500 list and with every level of government in Canada and the United States. In the process, Glenn has delivered workshops to over 15,000 people across 49 states, 10 provinces, 110 cities, and 9 countries. Glenn has spent over 20 years in senior talent management roles and delivering impactful presentations. Having worked with numerous clients to build succession plans from the ground up, he has experience in applying all of our products and services to help organizations realize their people potential. So you are in good hands. And I'll pass it off to Glenn now to walk you through our webinar content.
Thank you, Helen. We'll give this another try. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to spend with me today. What we're going to talk about, obviously, the main focus of today is getting buy-in from your management team, from your leadership team. And so we're going to talk about some of these things that may not seem directly related, but they will be in the context of getting that buy-in. So just a couple quick slides on the basics of succession planning versus replacement hiring, why it matters, and again, within the context of getting buy-in. The bulk of the session today will be talking about the importance of it, and we'll give you some specific tools about getting that buy-in and getting people on board with this, talking about some next steps. So we will get moving on quickly here. So in terms of what is succession planning, I mean, many of you probably have a sense for it. That's why you're here. At a high level, from a definition perspective, it's essentially the processes for identifying and developing internal talent to fill critical roles when vacancies occur. I always say succession planning is simply the talent we need, understanding what's important for success in those roles that we're succession planning for, the talent we have, and that's taking, it sounds a little institutional, but taking an inventory of the talent that we have that could move into those roles. And I would argue then the star of the show, or the most important thing, is what we're going to do about it. And that's around, actually developing people, development opportunities, and essentially building them towards, the growth they need to move into those next roles. And essentially, we really believe that succession is about opportunity for all and bringing the capabilities of everyone up, versus where some people think of succession planning as kind of just who's next. We take a much more broader approach to succession. And then just in terms of, and we'll talk a little bit about what strong succession plans are, essentially goal-oriented, and I'm going to talk specifically about that in the context of getting buy-in. This is not a point in time where we get together, we get a succession plan in place, and we're done. It should be ongoing because talent needs change, the organization change, and so forth. And so the succession plan it's really important that it's flexible to those changing needs. So we'll just do a quick poll, and I'll move on here. But just given that, how many here have a succession plan in place already? And I'll just give you a few seconds to complete that. And I'm not able to vote, so. So it's always interesting to see and sort of your view of what a succession plan is. I want to talk quickly because we'll talk to people and they'll say yes. When we dig a little deeper, what we find is that their succession plan is really more about replacement hiring. So they think, okay, we're good because if we look at, we look at our overall needs, there's a next in line that we could move into that role, which is better than not having anything. But that's really looks a lot more like replacement hiring, which you'll see by the chart is more reactive. It chooses the best person we have, not necessarily the best candidate, and it's really focused on the short term. And typically, what happens, the downside of replacement hiring is what you end up is replacing the incumbent with a very similar person, and that may or may not be a good thing, really depending on where the organization is going and where that organizational need is. The other real difficult thing with replacement hiring is the longer a person has been in the role, that role tends to bleed out in terms of scope, and they wear a lot of hats. They do a lot of different things. So it's actually really difficult to replace the incumbent. So if you're looking for, if you're looking for Lisa or Joe versus the VP of marketing, that's very, very difficult. So what a true succession planning approach is looking at the role and separating that out from the person, whereas replacement hiring is really about what you're doing is you're trying to replicate and you're trying to replace a person. So it's much more short term focused. I think the other thing that's really important to point out too is what a true succession plan does is actually really provides more objectivity. And with replacement hiring, it's always more about being in the right place at the right time. Maybe you just happen to be the person that reports to that incumbent, so you will get the role. And I think a good succession plan puts you in a position to have a more objective approach based on merits and not just kind of who's there now, whose kids have played soccer, for the last 10 years with that individual. So I think what a true succession plan does is really gives you a lot more fairness. From an organizational perspective, what that means is you're going to get a better candidate in place, and that might, in some cases, it might be the same candidate, but in a lot of cases, you're going to get a better candidate in place. You're able to actually really build that hire more or that promotion more into the future strategy of the organization. I'd almost say that from a fairness perspective, though, either many of you on the call or maybe you've known someone that consistently will talk to you and say, "Hey, there's a new role at my company that I've applied for. I think I really have a good chance." They don't get it. They're upset. 3, 4, 5 months later, it's the same thing. And it's just this cycle in which you end up in, and the individual may or may not be the right candidate without a formal succession plan in place. Both the perception and reality of fairness just doesn't exist. So I think having a more robust succession plan just helps you both get the right person in place, but I think as important, the transparency about the process and that perception of fairness throughout the organization is really important, because me as a candidate, I want to know that that the opportunity is there for me, and when I might not be a good fit, that we're able to support that with documentation and the fact that we've had an objective process for hiring that individual. And then the final thing, replacement hiring is, we just go along. There's a need, maybe sometimes a need that arises that we didn't see coming for a variety of different reasons. So we just hire as needed. I think with the succession plan, we really believe that succession plans should be, kind of the umbrella over or the foundation of everything you do with talent. So it should be integrated with recruitment, how you develop people, your diversity initiatives, all that stuff should really roll up to succession planning in some way. And I think that really helps make sure that we're making hiring thinking of tomorrow instead of we have a need right now and we have to put a bum in the seat. So just a little different between replacement hiring or not. We'll throw up another poll to make sure we don't put you to sleep in the in the first 11 minutes here. And what you're doing right now, is it succession planning? So interestingly enough, just in terms of this, the how you answered the succession plan, it looks like a fair number, about 44%, have a documented succession planning process in place. 22 has an undocumented. So a fair number of you in this session have something in place, which I think is great. And just in terms, we'll throw up another poll just to see whether that's planning or replacement hiring. Just to for you to be a little bit critical about your approach. Is it succession planning that you're doing? Is it replacement hiring? Is it a mix? Because I think a lot of times, especially our larger clients, there might be certain areas that are doing things, others are not. So there's some inconsistency across the organization. So I'll let you guys complete that. So we'll talk a little bit about why succession planning matters. And again, many of you already have a succession plan in place. You know, we rarely, especially given the demographics, regardless of the industry you're in, leadership is much older. There's certainly a lot of need, there. So we know we should be doing it. It's the right thing to do. But I think that many think of succession planning as just making sure that we're ready if somebody, you know, when somebody retires, when somebody leaves. We really, again, our view of succession is a little broader than that. We really believe that a good succession plan builds a pool of candidates. So your ideal succession plan is not about knowing that you have somebody in place and you've identified who's next. It's actually about choice. You want to be in a position where when a position comes up, that you actually have choice and you don't just sort of have to take you know, the one person that happens to be at the right place at the right time. The other piece in looking at it is we really believe that succession is providing those opportunities for employee growth and development. We hear it over and over with clients. One of our longtime clients, I'll always remember, we were in the room doing some work around succession, and they just actually, one of their very high potential employees just left, and he left for about a $3,000 or $4,000 raise, which, you know, by the end of the day, that's not really going to amount to a whole lot on the check that you get every 2 weeks. And I remember the president at the time said, and we'll just call him Joel, but you know, Joel clearly didn't leave for money. He left because he didn't see a path. And I think that we really view succession as that path. And I would say what we hear from clients more and more is, especially some of our public sector clients, where historically people would come to work for the public sector for the pension and they'd stay there for a long time. What they're finding is that's not enough of a draw to either recruit folks, and that's not enough power to make them stay. People want opportunity. They want to know that I'm going to be, I'm going to be better at something than I was today, a year from now, 2 years from now. I want to see opportunity, and that doesn't necessarily mean a new title. But I think when you have that broad succession strategy in place, it allows you to really, look at things as opportunity and provide the real. I always say the star of succession is development. So we really think succession is about providing those opportunities for growth and development. And then finally, you know, we want that because for some of our clients, succession is really, it can in some cases be really about the survival and the sustainability of the organization. It's really that serious. So just having the confidence in the company's ability to fill vacant roles, maybe as you grow, as people retire, and so forth. So it's really important from that perspective. So we'll talk about just in terms of why succession planning, what it can help you do. I mean, I don't think anybody on this call, any of this comes as a surprise, but you know, we want to retain organizational specific knowledge. So it's one thing to actually have a body and replace them when they leave, but we want to make sure that that organizational knowledge stays within the organization. We've talked about the motivation to motivate employees because they see this as an opportunity, creating that culture of growth and development, attracting. We really think it's one of the strongest ways to attract and retain staff, your good staff long term, and also improve your objective decision making from a talent perspective, from a hiring, and from a promotion perspective. So those are all good things. I don't think anybody on the call would argue with those. So now let's pull it back and we'll get right into what can we do when we're talking about buy-in. I'm assuming, and maybe I'm jumping out on a limb, but I'm assuming that everybody that everybody gets this. If you're talking to your executive team and trying to convince them why succession planning is important, you go through this list, say, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. So everybody would agree that it's important. Everyone would agree that these are the things that we get from it. However, we still see a significant amount of organizations that are not doing it. So if we should be doing it, if we get all these benefits, why are we not doing it? And simply, this is where we come back into the buy-in piece. And while all of these things are good, what I always say when you're trying to bring this outside of the scope of HR and make this an organizational initiative, it's really important do we have a specific reason for this? So all of these things are great, but do we have a challenge attracting and retaining staff? If not, that's not necessarily a reason to do succession planning. So we need if we're saying let's devote time and resources to succession planning. There needs to be a reason to do it. And it's interesting, even when we have clients come to us to work with us with succession planning, I say, what are your goals for the initiative? And a lot of times I get a bit of a blank look. And sometimes it's just our board of directors told us we need to have one by the end of the quarter. And I think that's a little bit short-sighted. We need to say, okay, what are the challenges within our organization from a talent perspective? How can we impact them with a robust succession plan? And really link that and make sure that the spirit of that stays through when you communicate. So I think having an actual goal for why you're doing succession plan helps you both get the initial buy-in, but I think even more importantly, what we tend not to be very good at in the talent industry is making sure that we're measuring progress in ROI after we've made it through an initiative. So it's going to understanding why it's important for us as an organization. So what specific needs are we trying to solve? Why is it important for each individual, is specifically leadership? And if we identify that before we go down this path, it helps get that buy-in because we're doing it for something. But as importantly, it helps us close that loop and forces us to measure progress and ROI and be able to close that loop and report that back. If we're asking people for their, I always say to our clients, the organization pays us with money. All of the executives are actually paying us with their time. So we always want to think of that ROI. So if we're asking for a few hours of their time, what are they getting for it? And if we have a goal at the outset, we're able to evaluate whether we're achieving that goal or not, closing the circle, and communicating that to our stakeholders and leadership. So I think it helps with the initial buy-in. This is why we're doing it, having a very clear goal for this. And also, if we're able to close that loop and really communicate ROI, that not only helps us build momentum, but it helps us. It helps people, be willing to invest a little bit more time as we scale this out and as we move forward with this. So understand if you're thinking of some of those that have said you had a succession plan, what was your goal? And did you reach that goal? So if your goal was, we want to have a culture of growth and development so that we can retain and attract and retain really good employees, has that happened? Are you able to measure it? Have you measured it? And has there been change? So one of the main things for buy-in is make sure that you have a goal and close that loop and ask yourself. And sometimes they're tough questions, right? Be willing to be open if you're not reaching those goals or not. And that's how you're going to get initial buy-in and be able to continue to maintain momentum and keep people working towards the same goals. So succession planning at a really high level, talking about 3 simple steps. There's obviously some process steps that we'll talk about a little bit later in the session, but we're going to focus a lot on step 1 in the next little bit here. and obtaining that buy-in from upper management. So as I said, first of all, let's make sure that we have a reason for doing this. And again, you're in this session, so clearly you understand the importance of it. But what we've, the data we have is, a pretty high level of succession planning initiatives fail in the first year. The main thing for that, or fail within the first 2 years, because they lose support, so they lose momentum. Without that buy-in, it's just another HR thing. It's just another talent initiative. And what we want to do is make sure that executives are bought in, not just lip service, but they're willing to give us their time. They're willing to do what's needed and make this not just an HR initiative, but an organizational initiative. So without that support, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get time and resources. And even if you get it, even if you get it at the outset, I always say part of your job, the main thing that you're doing is a succession planning. But I would argue that if you're, if you're leading this, part of your job is to always make sure that you're, for lack of a better word, selling this and making sure, continue to reinforce what people are getting it from it at an individual level. Because as I said, they're paying with their time. They see this as something that takes them away from their desk, that takes them away from, their what they're being rewarded for. So we just want to make sure that we're always, looking at them and making sure that we reinforce the value that's in it for them at an individual level. The other piece that we find too is that without real meaningful buy-in, when by the time organizations come to us, they've had a lot of starts and stops. So they've done something, got a little momentum, and then what happens is the organization gets busy or something happens in the economy, and it's really easy to get sidetracked with other priorities. So those stops and every time those stops and starts happen, it really dilutes the value and the image of what you're trying to do with succession planning. So it's important to not only get that buy-in initially, but make sure that you're always reinforcing that and understanding what's in it for everyone, so that you can maintain that momentum, because it is really easy to get sidetracked. So you'll see throughout this session, and you'll see a few different resources. One of them, and I'll go here while I talk so you can see, and you'll get this slide, so no need to raise your phone and click this, but we've tried to make it easy for you to access some of our resources. So you'll see the QR code that you can just take a picture of, and it'll take you to a much more a detailed workbook for getting that buy-in from management. But we'll go through some of it in this session today, and that's what a fair bit of the session is focused on. So, as I said, to get that buy-in, first we want to know why succession planning is important, and we've talked about the basics, why we should be doing it. Why, if you ask somebody why is it important, they'll list you the bullets. But again, you need to understand, what will we, in terms of your organization, what will we, in terms of the executive team, get from this? Also, talking about your current succession planning process, there's likely some things that are there. Even those of you that answered that you don't have a succession plan, there's likely things that you are doing now that are good. And I think documenting the current process just gives you an opportunity to have discussion. The structure of your company, the bullet's a little misleading, but we'll talk about what this is. It's actually making it real. So what does this mean? What does the need really mean if we're looking specifically at org charts, at where people are in terms of readiness? And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then in terms of the strength of your current candidates, and again, you're looking to identify where our weaknesses are. And what we find with organizations is, and you'll see what I mean in a minute, but we typically on the bench, you'll see people are level A, level B, and level C in terms of how ready they are for the next role. And what we see a fair bit, almost more the norm than the exception, is even our organizations that have a succession plan in place and are relatively mature in their approach, they may have one or two people in A, so that are pretty close to being ready for that next role. So they look at that and they say, "Oh, we're good." Level B, kind of that next layer, there tends to be a huge gap in terms of both number of people and their readiness. And then there's typically a lot of people in the C area that tend to be younger, new to the organization. So organizations will look at that. They go, okay, we're good. We got a couple of people. We have options. We don't have to do this. But if you dig a little deeper, what you'll find is sometimes, a lot of times, the people in your level A, so the people that are most likely to move into that role if there's a need, tend to be the same age and the same tenure as the person in the role. We see that a lot. So if you're planning for retirement and I'm retiring in 2 years, you look at the couple of the folks that report to me, they're likely retiring within 4 or 5 months of me. So it's important to look at that entire inventory. So we'll go into a little more detail. And I said these are kind of the reasons, and I still think it's important to communicate the importance and why we do succession planning. But what I'm saying is connect this specifically with an issue that you have that you're trying to solve, right? If you're just doing it because you think you should be doing it, I think that's going to be really difficult to get your senior leaders to buy in. Make it real. So we'll talk about the kind of your current process. And first of all, I don't think just in of itself, documenting what you're doing now is never a bad exercise. Getting a sense of who's involved, what selection criteria you have, I think is really helpful. And how formalized. So even those of you that said you have a succession plan in place, what we see is, regardless of the size of the organization, the maturity of that succession plan, in terms of documentation, how formal it is it can be different even within the organization. So some departments might be doing it, following it to the letter. Others are doing their own thing. Some are not doing anything at all. And I think what you want with that formality is making sure that it's consistent across the board. And I think that really helps with the transparency, how transparent the process is. So do the employees, because I always say too, there's one thing if all the executive team says we have a succession plan in place, are your employees aware of it? And is it transparent enough so your employees understand what the process is? And that doesn't necessarily mean, and this could be a whole other workshop on its own, but that doesn't necessarily mean that saying, Lisa, you're next in line. That's not communicating the process. We really frame this as development and opportunity versus your next. And just as an aside, one of the big questions in succession is, do you tell people, if they're level A and next in line? In our view, and I think for the most part, the industry view is, we would only be having that conversation once really the clock starts ticking on that transition. The reason for that is, a lot of things can change. If I'm next in line, the incumbent's not leaving for 5 years. A lot can change even with me on a personal level, my personal performance, but also the needs of the organization. So we would never necessarily have those specific succession conversations. But is the organization aware, or are employees aware of the opportunities? Are they aware of, when there is a new role, what your process looks like for identifying who's next? Or do they just think it's a popularity contest, and whoever the boss likes gets the promotion? So that perception, I think, is a really important thing. And then the last thing, and I would say, even if the organization is relatively mature in their approach to succession planning, the communication piece can always use work, right? Anybody on this call, anything that you've done, if you've done a debrief afterwards, typically one of the things that we can always do better is communication. So there's always room for improvement there. And then so I think from how to build this into getting buy-in from your management team, I think that finding ways like this to get the management team involved. So getting together with them, documenting the process with them, and the purpose of this is, yes, the main purpose is to document where you're at, where you want to go. But I'd say kind of the secondary goal is to get senior management involved, to get them discussing what succession is, what we're doing, successes that we've had. And I think it's just about building that dialogue and starting that dialogue. I think that can go a long way. So using a relatively simple tool, you're getting something done in terms of documenting your current process. But I think the richness of it are the conversations that you have as a leadership team while you're documenting that process. We also have I think a great tool. And again, I always like, is there an easy way to, can we very easily ask for a little bit of our senior leaders' time, but get them engaged in this? And I think the something like this this questionnaire that we have out there is, it would likely take them about 10 or 15 minutes to do. So I think it's an easy way to capture what they're doing, their perception of where we're at, and then it gives you an opportunity to get together and discuss that as a group. So again, asking for a little bit in terms of time, and then when you're bringing them together, there's actually a purpose, right? And you're trying to align and sort of validate where you're at, where people think you're at. And I think it communicates. It has them thinking about succession from their perspective, and I think that's that's certainly a great step in the right direction. So this is an interesting one. So if your CEO is completing this, right, is your succession planning initiative supported by your CEO? It's interesting if your CEO would check this, but the rest of the leadership team would not, right? So I think the richness is not only getting people to complete it, understanding where you are, but I think the richness is getting together as a team and discussing where those differences are and why people think differently about certain things. And in the context of that, you're able to really reinforce what you're doing now, and what's important in order to have a mature and robust succession plan. Any questions? I'll just pause for a minute and have a quick drink of water, but any questions so far?
No questions so far. We're doing good.
Awesome. Okay, so we will keep going. So those are some things. Those things are, I think, kind of some easy ways to at least start to get people engaged. And the previous tools, I think, are really are kind of a light way to get people engaged, get people thinking about succession. But if I told you, just having them complete that, if they're going to complete it and then go, we're ready to go, I'm all in. That's obviously that's not going to happen. So I think these next two things that we'll talk about, I think, are probably the most impactful. And for those of you on the call, I think it's about, because this will take a bit more time, but I think it's looking at this at a high level, and I'll finish the session and talk a little bit more about how all these pieces fit. However, it's about understanding where you're at in terms of how involved and how bought in your senior management team is, and what you can reasonably expect them to do. So maybe early on, something like that questionnaire is a good place to start, just to sort of dip our toes in the water, just to get them to start to think about succession. However, to really get that investment in terms of their time, we really have to make it real for them. So at the end of the day, all the good stuff about succession, none of the executives are going to argue with that. But it's really about identifying specific need. So this is another, I think, really good exercise that makes it real, right? So, and this is not kind of unearthing information that people know, but there is some real value in documenting things. So we go through a process with our clients where we will have them, essentially go through their org chart, go through the people that roll up to them, enter their names, and start to think about start to think about their readiness for the role. Where it becomes interesting is, you people sort of have a sense, but it forces them to think about not only who's ready, and maybe there's no check mark, maybe there's maybe all of these are red, so nobody gets a check mark, nobody's ready within the next 3 years. So let's say we're looking at a department, and nobody gets that first check mark. I mean, seeing your org chart and seeing it actually documented is super powerful, and it's amazing. So what we do for our clients is we will do this, and actually we'll deliver an org chart to them that's color coded. So you can imagine, you'll see You'll see the CEO or the CFO up here, and basically all of these boxes are red. That's a powerful visual to get them to understand that we're not where we need to be. And what we can infer from that is, if something happens to the individual, they leave unexpectedly, there is no one, right? So the visual and the color coding of that is really important. So that's the readiness kind of within the next 3 years, and you get a quick overview of what that depth of talent looks like, and we'll go into it a little deeper with the bench in a minute. The next piece is plans to remain with the organization for more than 5 years. The most obvious one, and for some, especially for some of our folks with collective bargaining, you're not allowed to ask this, kind of when you plan to retire, and you can imagine, right, if your boss calls you into the room and says, "Hey, hey Lisa, when are you planning to retire, by the way?" It could be a bit off-putting. So the easy one is retirement, and I always say when we're planning for this, we should plan for when the individual can retire versus when they will retire. And the reason for that is things can happen, right? And I think that I'm whether something happens in your personal life, something happens in the world. I know what we found, throughout the pandemic is people that were planning on actually working for a long time that really completely changed their perspective. And we had I remember talking with an organization, and they had three of a 7-person executive team leave within the same week, and just their perspective changed, and they said, I wasn't thinking of it, but just my personal time is really important. So the retirement is kind of the most obvious there, but I would always, when you're completing this, I would always think about, and kind of, we call it flight risk. Do we, and this can be a combination of things, and it's not, the idea is that this is not a perfect tool. The intention of it is to drive conversation. So we want to have a conversation of, they plan to remain, like I said, retirement is the most obvious, but I want to think, do we think this individual is going to be here for the next 5 years? And that can be a variety of things. We kind of notice that, they've been in the role for a long time. We don't really have a next challenge for them. And we get the sense that they're bored, and they're probably looking, right? They're hopefully not working on the resume on their company laptop. But our gut says that they're probably looking. Or if it happens to be a role where there's a ridiculous demand, and we know that there's a lot of opportunity of. So to try to think about, do we think this individual is going to be here for a while? And again, that's something that we can color code and get a sense of where people are ready, and if people will be leaving the organization. And then I think something that when we're looking at a specific level, and a lot of times we look at the senior management level, is we don't think so. We might have somebody here that's ready to move into that role, but do they have a replacement? So we feel good. Okay, we have actually a couple people. However, if they move into the incumbent role, there's another hole and there's nobody there. So you can take this deep, but I think the key piece of this is look at it structurally as an organization and identify where your risks are. And I think that's the best way to communicate the importance, to actually make it about the individual. And having conversations about, what if Luke left tomorrow? What would we do? And look at it organizational chart wise.
Just before we move on this template, Glenn, we have a quick question. Can you just talk through the definition of those boxes under each persona and who they apply to? Is it the person at the top or the incumbent? How do we use those 3 boxes?
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you for the question. So we are doing this. So let's just say we're doing this for the CEO. So we would have CEO in the top position, in that top box, their name. So we would have the incumbent there. And then it would be, typically we would do this for, at a minimum, their direct reports, but depending on the size of the team, their indirect reports as well. So we would have all the people on their team, their position, their name. And when we're talking about ready to move into the position within 3 years, if it's Joe here, we're talking about how ready is Joe? Do we think Joe will be in a position to move into the CEO's role within 3 years? So hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
And again, it's just it's a way to visually represent need, and the need is on a specific individual level. And we'll even dig in a little deeper with another tool that we have in a second, but I will move on to, so the succession bench, the succession bench is kind of another version of this, and basically it's a great way, and I wish there was a better word, but it's a great way to have that broader overall view of the talent we have. So, right, succession planning being the talent we need, what's important for this SVP of HR role. Now, what talent do we have, and how does their readiness look? And I always say, for those of you that maybe you think actually putting together a succession plan is so far away, it's going to be an uphill battle. I always say this simple tool here, the succession bench, is, if you did nothing else, and certainly we hope you do more, and look at a more broader succession plan. But one of the ways is just to get people. And I always say, if you can just get your senior leaders to populate your succession bench and just have that snapshot of where we think people are. I won't go in, and if you download it on our website, you'll see kind of the progression. So I won't go too much into this middle column, but at a minimum, just doing that inventory, understanding where people are, and again, at a minimum, quarterly, you put it on. You have an agenda item where everybody pulls out their succession benches and talks about talent. What I say, one of the things that we want to do with succession is make sure that it's not this thing that we do over in the corner. It's something that we're all talking about, that it's important, and we ensure that it's important by consistently having a spotlight on it. And the succession bench is a great way to do it. And again, it's another way of visually demonstrating sort of where we're at. So obviously, it's clear when I look at this. I have two people in level A, which is not bad, right? In terms of our bench strength, less strength here, and then we have a lot of people here. But again, it's thinking, okay, are Charlene and Rachel, are they around the same age as Perry? Will they be here when Perry leaves in 2025? So it just gives you that a one-page snapshot that you can keep the spotlight on. So just another way of doing a similar thing that we did with the org chart. So lastly, from a tools perspective, and again, this is another really great tool. I think one of the big reasons why people don't get further with succession is it can seem really overwhelming, right? You look at the organization, there's so much to do. We look at the average age of our employees and our leadership, and they're closing in on retirement. So I think the one thing too, and again, it's a simple tool to get leadership engaged and involved in the process. And this is something that we would have them do for their team. And again, what it does is it determines need, and also determines where where you should focus. But the nice thing about it is everything we do, there's sort of there's a main reason why we do it, and the main reason why we do it is try to identify where we should focus first, right? Because we can't do everything all at once. But everything is really about the richness, and is the conversation that you're having with these things. So the easy thing, and we can ask the leaders to do this, and it probably would take them 4 or 5 minutes. It's not a big ask, but it's getting them to think about everybody, everybody on their team, and thinking, is the role going to be likely to be vacant soon? And as I said, very similar to what we talked about before. Could we know that they're retiring? Is there a lot of demand for their role and we think they might leave? Are they bored? Are they looking elsewhere? And we always ask people to use this entire scale. So if it's a 5, it means we're pretty confident they're leaving within the year. Easy thing to do, and we can do this really quickly. Impact is and I always say this one, and I think we might have used to label this importance, or critical, but we're not. Everybody's important, right? We don't want to get the point your job is more important than mine. But I use the example. We have a client, and they're relatively large, so I think they're about just over a $3 billion company, so massive company. And they have 2 individuals at the organization that if they walked out the door tomorrow, they would probably be about 10 to 14 days that they would be able to exist, because of the amount of knowledge and the amount of parts of the business and the organizational knowledge that's embedded in those two people. And by the way, they're none of them are leaders. So I think that's what we want to do is when we talk about impact is how many, I always like to think of it as how many different parts of the business flow through this person. Um, how unique is their, the knowledge that they have that others don't have within the organization. So I always say too, if and in our world, we used to use the hit by the bus analogy, and that was always kind of morbid. So now we use the win the lottery. So if you're thinking of the people on your team, and there was a lottery, and they walked into your office on Monday and said, "This is I'm not even giving you notice because I just won the Powerball." What one, which one would make you sweat the most, essentially? And they would be a five. But it's about thinking about what parts of the business touch them, who else can do their role. So as I said, you can do this simply, and I'd say when you use it the first time, just getting your leaders to think about this is important. But then I think it's the discussion around each of these, right? Like, why did you rate Larry a five? And if he left, what would that mean? And I think it's the conversations that you have around those that really start to make this meaningful. If there's specific skills or knowledge, and then I think the other piece too is internal and external talent. So could someone move into their role, and I think that goes back to our bench. And then external talent, because it's interesting, some of the heard so many that, oh, I know there's nobody really in a good position to move into that role, but we'll just hire externally. Sometimes depending on that role, that it's always possible, but you're going to tend to, depending on the role and depending on the job market, you may have to overpay for that role. It may take you 6, 9, 12 months to fill that role. So it's about completing these things, but the richness is about having information, having conversations around this. So the main purpose is, where should we focus? Where should we start? And I think that's good, to have an iterative and a really planful approach. But it's the conversations that you have around these things that are important. And usually I don't see the questions, but I actually do. So I'll just pull that down. And we had somebody, what challenges, if any, have you seen for formalizing succession planning in the public sector? And what are your thoughts on how to address them? So great question. And I think what we're seeing in the public sector a fair bit is the main reason why, and it goes back to what I talked about before, the main reason why they're doing succession is they're not able to compete for talent like they used to. And it's becoming really, really difficult to. So they have positions that are going unfilled for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And what happens is it means other people have to take on more, and then they have more turnover. So the challenge is really obvious in the public sector that we hear, and their ability to compete. I would say the main challenge we see with the public sector is typically there tends to be union or bargaining unit as part of that. And I think the big challenge is just how this is communicated. And in a nutshell, and I'm happy to sort of talk about this after. I'll have my contact information if you want to reach out. But what we find is it's really about positioning. So, for example, for our public sector, yes, it's succession planning, but we rarely use that it's a bit of a loaded word. And I think can be a challenge when it comes to dealing with the public sector union. So we really focus on opportunity development, and it's really about positioning this as employee development versus succession planning. And it's what we're doing is not that much different. I think it's really about positioning. So hopefully that helps your question a little bit. And I'm just going to skip through a few of these, just looking at the clock here. Uh, we have a really good tool on creating an advisory team. So we talked a little bit about how to get people, how to get buy-in, and the main thing is let's make it real for them and understand that it's not about this high level thing. It's about what happens if Joe leaves, and what's the trickle effect of that. So make it real. Make sure that you understand why you're doing it. So the main thing of the advisory team is actually making those, not only getting buy-in, but making sure there's a broader group of people that are accountable. So you can download that and find out a little more information. But the main focus of that is we don't want this to be an HR initiative. We want it to be organizational, and getting a broader group of champions it can be really helpful and really provide some accountability. And I just had another question, that org chart form. Ideally, that org chart should be completed by the incumbent. And we work with our clients, and we'll actually, I think it works really well when we have the incumbents complete it, but then we actually come together as a group and have them talk about why they've actually rated people, less than 3 years or more than 3 years. So the incumbent, I think having them own that is really important. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't be challenged by their peers or maybe challenged, but I think having them own that process is also a really important piece for buy-in. So again, just keeping an eye on time, because I'm sure those of you in the Eastern time zone are probably thinking about what's for lunch, as I am. And so I just talk a little bit about our process, and I think the next slide, yeah, the next slide is you can download the process as well. But I think, but I think the big thing is having an overarching kind of strategy and process. Doesn't have to be ours. I think ours is pretty good. But as I said, basically taking this through an iterative approach, right? If you try to if you try to bite off more than you can try to do this, it ends up dying in its own way. So I would say have a process, have sort of that long-term plan, and then look at it iteratively. And I would say, if you're looking at this process, a really easy let's first step is just identify those critical roles. And number one, we understand where we can focus so we can narrow the need a little bit, but also an easy way to get people involved and get people engaged and talking about succession planning. And I think just having a process ensures that consistency, and it makes it easier for you to get people involved and have a plan, communicate that plan when you're getting people's buy-in, communicating this process to them so they know what they're buying into essentially, and they know what's going to be expected. So just having a process in place, I think, is really important for a variety of things, not just succession. And we'll just throw up another quick poll, and I will move on. But we'll throw it up, just kind of talking about what are the greatest kind of challenges, from a succession planning perspective that you're facing. And so we're at the end, and I think looks like most of you have stayed. So I do thank you for the time. We've talked about, and I'll talk about a lot of the resources that we have out there. So we've talked about the importance of buy-in. We've given you some tools to do buy-in. The funny thing is I think sometimes our clients will bring us in specifically for that because they haven't been able to kind of get that engagement and get that buy-in as much as they can. And there is value. Obviously, we're a little bit biased, but there is value in working with a consultant. I would say, this is what we do. And we can sometimes keep your leadership team more accountable, because we've been doing this. But I would say the biggest kind of advantage of having a consultant, many of you on this call have been in sessions like this. You've done the work, some of you based on the questionnaire. I think the big thing is this can be our focus, right? I always say, yes, our job is to get the succession plan in place and keep people accountable. But because of this is what we do, when the team or yourself, when you get distracted by other things, we're in a position where we can kind of keep you on task, so to speak, and be sometimes be the bad cop. So I think just the fact that we've done it before, the fact that we have the time, it does really. I think that's a lot of the value that we provide. And I always say too, when we work, part of our job is not only to do succession planning, but part of our job, I always say, is to make sure that everybody that we work with understand what's in it for them on an individual level. So just a little quick sell. We really believe, and one of the reasons why we do this session is we really believe in succession planning. We believe why it's important. So we do a lot of things to kind of communicate that important, and many of the stuff. So you'll see things like this. We have so the succession planning guide that you'll see on our website, the training, a lot of the stuff is free. And we do obviously have services available. Both we have something that I'll talk about in a minute called the Succession Planning Launch that is really cool, and also some customized consulting if you have some specific needs. And I'll just finish here with the succession planning launch. The big challenge that we always hear is why we haven't got it done yet is time. And the nice thing about the launch is we've developed specifically a solution for that. We actually asked for 2 separate half days from your leadership team. That's it. No homework, no pre-work, and at the end of that, we actually end up with a full succession plan, 12-month implementation plan, and it kind of gets gets the boring stuff, but the really important stuff done, so you can actually focus on the engine of succession that's development. So, certainly check that out if you have a chance. It's really the quickest and easiest way to get a really good head start on this and start to build that momentum. And then, as I said, we are here to help as much as we'd love to work with any of you or all of you on the call. There's a lot of amazing resources on our site that we've really invested heavily in. Again, you'll see this QR code, information on the launch and the consulting, but we have several templates, many of them that you've seen here, case studies, webinars. There's lots of great information because, for some of you, maybe budget doesn't allow it, or you just philosophically prefer to do things internally. Regardless of whether you're interested in working with us or not, there's a lot of great resources on the website that we encourage you to check out. Lastly, I'm always happy to. We really love talking to people because there's always things that we can learn that helps our clients. So whether you're kind of interested in working with us or not, but there's something that you want to talk about, whether through our template or something that you've heard today, please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to talk and help wherever we can. And lastly, in terms of this session is, and I'll be quiet for a second and maybe let Helen jump in. I believe that we send the information for the professional credit to you.
Yes, thank you, Glenn. So if anyone is here to get professional development credits for SHRM or ATD, I need to know, particularly for SHRM, so that I can send you a certificate of completion. So if you could please check the box in the poll there if that's you. If not, feel free to ignore that. I'll also send a link in the chat if you'd like to hop on a call with Glenn. You can book a free call with him here on his calendar and ask some more specific organization-focused questions. And if you liked what you saw today, we do have webinars running throughout the rest of the year monthly. So I'll share the link to our calendar and you can take a look there. There's a lot more succession-specific webinars, but also some talent development. So these are fantastic free resources that you can come to, bring your team, and receive some handy tools along the way as well. So that's all that we have for you today. Glenn, thank you for answering questions throughout the session already. We kind of did our homework ahead of time. So we hope you have a great rest of the afternoon and stay tuned for a recording and slides from this webinar. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any more questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.